The science of Derby, the science of Derby. Let's learn something new.
Hi, and welcome to The Science of Derby with me, Professor Legs. Today we are going to be talking about wheels. This is the second episode on gear in the second part of the exciting trilogy, bearings, wheels, and stops. Let's start off with a classic drawing. Here's a wheel. On either side of the wheel sits a bearing, which we talked in depth about in the previous episode, so check that out. And, of course, the wheel sits on the axle. Wheels are made of polyurethane, which is a handy, super fancy plastic. Of course, plastic is horrible for the environment in all sorts of ways, but you gotta admit, it's just a little bit cool. However you cut it, if you're doing roller derby, you're probably skating on polyurethane wheels. There are two main things you need to know about wheels. The first is the diameter, that is how tall they are from top to bottom. And in derby, you will basically either be on 59 millimeters or 62 millimeters. Smaller wheels are a little bit more agile, and large wheels are a little bit faster and smoother. The second topic is hardness, or how squishy the wheel is. This is measured on the durometer Shore scale, and durometer literally means hardness meter. The higher the number on the durometer scale, the harder the wheel is, the more slippery it is. Makes it really good for sliding sideways, drifting off sideways. And the lower the number, like gummy bears, the more soft and mushy it is. For roller derby wheels, we're really only looking at the A scale, and we're only looking about 78 to 100A. And to tell you the honest truth, you really only care about 88 to 98A. Most wheels you skate on will be within this range. Before we dig into some math, I want to talk just about how wheels work. This is amazing to me. It blew my mind when I started engineering school. I had never kind of thought about what it actually meant to have a wheel rolling, even though of course there's wheels everywhere. So what does it actually mean when a wheel is rolling? So imagine we have a series of dots around a wheel. There's like an infinite number of them, but let's just put 5 little points along the wheel. As the wheel rolls from 1 to 2, for example, it rolls from 1 to 2 to 3. Remember, there's no sliding going on here. So what is actually happening? The wheel is pivoting around that little point. So you can imagine each point is sort of temporarily fixed to the ground. It's not sliding. And the wheel is pivoting around to the next point. And the ground kind of, as the wheel falls over, the ground catches the next point on the ground, sort of. And then that point rotates, falling forward, and the third point catches it. And each time the whole wheel kind of falls forward, the next point catches it on the ground, and it continues on like that. Because a wheel is smooth and there's an infinite number of points, it doesn't feel like it's chunking forward as it rolls. It's just smoothly rolling, falling forward and being caught, and the points behind lifting off the ground in an endless cycle. Isn't that cool? So beautiful. There's so many incredible physical mechanisms happening all around us all the time. Wheels are cool, and that's how they work. So let's get into a little bit of the math. Remember that point 1? If the wheel is rotating, even temporarily, about that point, let's say the wheel has a diameter d, how far does it travel in one rotation until point 1 comes back to the ground again? That's right, it's good old trigonometry. Pi times the diameter, or twice the radius if you like. Pi times d is the circumference of the wheel, or how far it travels in one rotation. So for each rotation of the bearing, it's going to travel pi d. And this is one of the ways in which size matters for wheels. Let's take a look at these two here. If the diameter of one is twice that of the other, for each rotation of the bearing of the center of the wheel, the larger wheel will travel twice as far as the smaller wheel. And this is why we generally say larger wheels are faster, meaning they cover more distance for each rotation. And if you've ever been on a racing bicycle with these nice big wheels, you'll know what I mean compared to like a BMX or something. Let's talk about the other big factor when it comes to wheel diameter. The ground we skate on is never perfectly smooth. Polished concrete is obviously a lot smoother than sport court or asphalt or sidewalk concrete. But every surface you skate on, when you zoom really far into it, looks something like this, and it's all bumpy. If you have a wheel that is pretty large compared with those bumps, life's great, no problem. It rolls on over them, sort of like Super Mario running across those little blocks, or like a giant monster truck squashing cars or something. Easy peasy. The diameter is so large compared to the actual bumps, it's no big deal. Now, what happens if the wheel is a lot smaller compared to those bumps? Then things aren't so great. It can get stuck or just be really bumpy. And if you've ever skated on sidewalk concrete or on a bumpy road, you'll know this feeling. Larger diameter wheels feel much smoother on any surface, but especially on rougher surfaces. One more topic on wheel attributes, that is hardness. If we have two wheels of the exact same size, but different hardnesses, the hard one is going to be much bumpier, whereas the squishy, soft, jiggle-life wheel has a lot more give to it and will feel smoother. This hard wheel is going to be bumpier, but it'll also skip over the surfaces a little better and not get all bound up in them like the soft wheel. Therefore, we can say it's going to be a little bit faster. Imagine like rolling a gummy bear on the floor versus a hard marble or something. But to be honest, in roller derby, the bumpiness of the surface and the wheel is a bigger factor than any speed gain you'll get from having harder wheels in terms of them getting bound up in the floor. And as we'll see later, the most important thing about hard versus soft wheels is how much slide there is between the wheel and the surface. Aside from the properties of the wheel itself, there is a mechanical real-life consideration to take into account. Larger wheels can feel a little bit clunkier and get in the way of your footwork, and so jumps and digging into your edges can feel a little easier on smaller wheels. You can feel like you're more agile. Let's have a quick summary so far. We're just talking about rolling right now, no sliding. So if you're rolling, the larger the wheel diameter, the faster and smoother it's going to feel. Those 3 millimeters of difference between 59 and 62 millimeters can really make a difference in the game. You will notice it. It's not going to totally change how you play or anything, but it's a thing. Regarding hardness, in general, softer wheels are going to ride a bit smoother. This can make a huge difference when you're skating outside. Hard wheels can feel marginally faster, but it's really important that they're not slipping while you're pushing. So for outdoor skating, you definitely want big, soft wheels. Here I have these Road Hogs, which are actually 65 millimeters, so they're extra big, and they're 78A. They're very soft wheels. These are great wheels for skating outside. Don't hit outdoor concrete with 98A 59 millimeter wheels. Your teeth will rattle, your joints will hate you, you'll be destroying your cartilage. Don't do that. Love your joints. Just take care of yourself. Outdoor skating, you want big squishy wheels. Indoor skating, it's a different story. If you want to see a kind of extreme example of this, check out my new skates. These are inline skates, obviously, but look at these wheels. These are 125 millimeters. They're 85A, so they're relatively soft and giant. These are ideal outdoor wheels. You can go on those rough concrete, rough asphalt, and it's pretty smooth. No judgment, derby community, quad skates forever, but derby's closed. It's 2020, and I need to stay in shape. So I got these nice big outdoor skates, giant wheels, soft. Can't go wrong. That's just about all you need to know about wheels when it comes to rolling forward and backwards. However, roller derby is not just rolling around. Let's get a little bit more into what's happening between the wheel and the ground. So when we're rolling forward and back, if there's no slipping, if we're not skating on ice or something, there's basically no friction. As we talked about, the wheel just rotates from one point to another, the ground catches it, the bearing's working well, so everything spins. It's great. There's also no force that we can really generate. If we have momentum, we'll just keep rolling forward. If we don't have any, we'll just kind of sit there. Now, if you watch the stride video, you know that pushing in the horizontal direction, side to side, this is again with no slipping, so if the wheel's not sliding against the ground, that's going to give us all the force we need to be moving forward, which is great. So what happens when there is sliding going on? So that is when the wheel's going sideways and it's sliding against the ground. We're going to get some friction generated there, which is going to generate heat and slow down the skate. Let's dig into the mathematics of friction in general and then look at how it applies to wheels. Here we have a little dude trying to push a big heavy box. And it's the weight of that box that's pulling down into the ground, and he's trying to push the box with some sort of force. So what is this weight? Well, weight is simply a force exerted by a mass due to gravity pulling down upon it. So we can say this force downward is the mass times the gravity, or we just say weight. Now, if the block is static, it's not moving, it's not the weight itself that's preventing the block from moving, but it's the friction that's generated between the surfaces. So this friction is going to produce a force counteracting the force of the little dude pushing against the block. And we can talk about the extent of this force by using a coefficient of static friction. This is just a really fancy way of saying how sticky the floor is. We use μs here for the coefficient of static friction. And so if you have a super slippery surface like ice, the coefficient of static friction will be quite low. If it's sticky glue, it's going to have a high coefficient. And the maximum force that friction can exert back against the little guy pushing is going to be related to that coefficient, or how sticky the surface is, times by the weight, how heavy the object is. So it depends how heavy it is, depends how sticky the surface is, and that's going to give you the maximum amount of force that can be pushed back against the guy. And that sort of makes sense. If you have a really light object, it's going to be easier to move than a heavy one. Or even if you have a heavy object but it's on oil or something really slippery, in other words, a low coefficient of static friction, it's also going to be easy to move. So let's see what happens when this little guy is pushing. So if the force he's pushing with is less than the coefficient of static friction times the weight of the object, nothing happens. It just sits there. Either the object's too heavy, the surface is too sticky, or he's just not strong enough. So now what happens if, little guy goes to the gym, gets super strong, and now is pushing stronger than the coefficient of static friction versus the weight? Well, guess what? It's going to overcome that force of static friction, and it's going to start sliding. So let's talk about this coefficient of static friction in real derby life. So it's a product of the floor and the wheels. So if you have really sticky wheels and you have a really sticky floor, then your coefficient of static friction is going to be really high, meaning it's really sticky. It's going to take a lot of force to get things sliding. Or if you're in a middle situation, let's say on sport court, and 94A wheels, kind of middle of the road derby wheels, you're going to have a sort of median average type of coefficient. And likewise, if you have really slippery floor, really slippery wheels, it's going to be super easy to start sliding, or we'd say your coefficient of static friction is quite low. So this is all before the wheels are sliding. Everything's static at this point. And before we get into the math of a sliding situation, let me set up this scenario. Let's say there's a blocker with their plow stop on really strong. Another skater comes into them, and they're really able to resist that force that skater's bringing into them. They're able to stop, no problem. Now in another situation, let's say that blocker is already moving forward. Either they're sliding forward already, or that skater's been pushing on them for a long time or something, and they receive the exact same force while they're already moving. You're going to find it a lot harder to stop and a lot harder to resist that force. But why is that? Because the incoming skater has exactly the same amount of force, but when you're already sliding, the blocker has less sliding power. And why is that? Well, let's talk about it. An easy way to think about this is to imagine a situation if you've ever tried to push against something really heavy to get it moving, and you're pushing and you're pushing and you're pushing, and then finally you give enough force and it starts sliding. What happens after that? Here we have a diagram and a little chart of our little dude pushing the block, and he's trying and he's trying. And then finally, once it starts sliding, it actually has less friction and requires less force to keep it moving than it did to get it moving in the first place. So there's kind of a point, this is that maximum point we were talking about before, which is the coefficient of static friction times the weight of the object. And this is the maximum amount of static friction that that object can exert back. And he has to push and push and push till finally his force matches that level. And once he passes it, then the object starts moving and it gets into this other situation, which we call kinetic friction. So there's a new coefficient, another mu, the coefficient of kinetic friction, which is less than the coefficient of static friction, meaning it's easier to slide the thing once it's already going than when it's static. In real life, this has some really cool situations where it comes up. Probably the most interesting one is drift racing, which I don't care anything about cars, but I do love it when they drive sideways. And if you want to get a good dose of that, you can watch Initial D, a Japanese animated series that really made drift racing super popular. It's really cool. It's very physics-based. It's awesome. And basically, I'm actually going to link an article below about different techniques to start drifting to get a car kind of driving sideways. And it's all about these coefficients of friction. Basically, you need different techniques to overcome the coefficient of static friction. So you get into this kinetic friction situation where the car is driving sideways. Is it better to do drift racing versus grip racing? You'll have to watch Initial D and let me know what you think. This science also plays into things like anti-lock brakes, which is how you don't want to be in that sliding situation because you have no control over your car and you actually have less stopping power. So you want to keep your brakes just behind that coefficient of static friction times the weight of your car. So they kind of go chukka 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 with the brakes so you don't get sliding off into another car or into a lamppost. You could also just take public transit or roller skates. Don't drive a car. But anyway, interesting from a physics point of view. Here's a slightly more advanced but super important topic, and that is how wheel friction interacts to allow you to move around the track. So you'll remember in the stride video that forward and back motion with your wheels cannot contribute to any of your force moving forward. It's all about that horizontal push into the floor that gets you moving. But how does that work? How does pushing sideways actually get you moving forward around the track? This is the same skate from the back and from the top. So when you push into the ground, that's going to send a force sideways into the skate. And there is friction between the wheels and the ground, which prevents the skate from sliding sideways. And this allows the horizontal force to be redirected forward. The force is going into the ground and that friction is preventing it going sideways and it's being redirected forward, especially if you're already moving forward and how you're using your body. And this capacity to redirect that force depends on wheel friction. If your wheels are too slippery or the surface is too slippery and you start sliding a little bit when you push, and you can test this if you have slippery wheels and you push really hard in your stride and you slide a little bit, you're going to be losing some of your power, or worse yet, land on your face, which is no good. Now I want to take a mini moment here to talk about mixed wheel setups. I'd like to do a whole episode on setting up your skates and your gear, but since we're talking about wheel specs, I think it's a nice time to talk about mixed wheel setups. And my advice here in general is take it or leave it. If you can, skate on all 8 wheels being the same wheel type. So just one wheel type. It means your hub response is going to be the same. You know, just one set of bearings. You don't have to worry about how old are your bearings and which half set of wheels. It's just easier. However, sometimes that's not possible. I skated for years with mixed wheel sets until I got these current wheels, which are Royal Assassins now. But until then, I couldn't quite get the right amount of slide in my stops versus grip in my pushes and cornering. And so if you're like that and you can't quite get the right balance, you might want to consider mixing wheel harnesses. You can't mix wheel diameters. So you don't want to get in the situation where you have like a really large wheel diameter and a small wheel diameter. Even a few millimeters makes a difference. It just doesn't work. So if you skate on mixed wheel diameters, I'd love to know about it. I don't think it works. You just can't really do it. Lots of people have all sorts of different wheel setups. But my advice, if you're facing this problem, which is you want a little bit more slide in your stops, but you still want to keep your grip, is to put the harder wheels, the slidier wheels on the outside and stickier wheels on the inside of each of your skates. So the wheels closest to the inside of your body will be stickier, outside of your body will be harder. So maybe this would be like a 93 on the inside, 95 on the outside type of combo, or maybe 95 on the inside, 98 on the outside. This will give you a little bit more grip on your cornering and your pushing, and a little bit more slide as you start to initiate your plows and hockey stops. I would like to say officially and for the record that I don't believe in pusher wheels. So that would mean on your left leg, your inside leg, putting stickier wheels here, inside relative to the track, and slidier wheels towards the inside of your body. Some people think this gives them more push as they're going around the track. For roller derby, I don't think this is a good idea because what it tends to do is favor the right plow and not the left plow. It's going to make your left plow harder to do, and I would argue a lot of skaters actually need to build up their left plow and work harder on their left plow and use it more often to increase their flexibility as a skater, especially if you're blocking. You don't want to disadvantage your left plow, and therefore in a game you're going to use it less. You actually want to work on that left plow. Also, some people will put a stickier wheel at their front inside wheel so they can kind of get a toe flick motion. If you watch my video on stride, you'll see my point of view there, which is I don't think that's the right stride technique at all. So I do not agree with some sort of setup like this. My advice is if you can skate on a homogeneous set, go homo all the way, right? And if not, if you really feel like you need a little more slide in your stops while maintaining that grip, outside of your skates, I would put a little bit harder, inside your skates, a little bit stickier. That's my opinion. If you disagree, please let me know in your comments. Let me know what you're skating on. There's all sorts of setups. You can even get wheels with each wheel itself has a mixed setup. And so I'm interested in how people are finding that and what you're skating on. So let me know. So that's really all I think you need to know about friction and wheels when it comes to roller derby. If you have harder wheels, they'll be a bit more slipperier. It's easier to start sliding like in your stops. And if you have stickier wheels, they are going to be easier to get your push and power through your stride. But like everything in life, it's a bit of a balancing act. And really, each person is going to have their own setup depending on their weight, depending on their skating style, depending on the floor they're on. Are you changing surfaces all the time, or what your skate setup is? Some people really prefer plastic hubs versus metal hubs, and it goes on and on. It's really a personal setup. If you're feeling daunted by that, just remember that derby awesomeness is not all about gear. Certainly, like having the right gear for the situation is gonna help you perform better or worse depending on the situation. But some of the best skaters I know never change their wheels. They have one set of wheels, they use them for any surface, no matter what, and they're incredible. And they've just trained themselves. They adjust to whatever situation they're in and can play amazing in those situations. Other people I know at the beginning of my career, I think I over-indexed, let's say, on different gear, and I had a million different wheels and I was always changing them. And I sort of wish when I started that I had done that less and worked on my skills a little bit more. So remember, derby awesomeness is a huge amount about skills and your personal training, but also about the love you have for your team and the love for your league and the energy you put in and the fun you have and all the other great stuff that goes into it. It's not all about gear, and buying new gear is not going to make you an awesome skater. It's just putting in the time and training and loving what you're doing and exploring. So that's it for the episode. Hope it was super helpful and you understand a little bit more about wheels and how things roll around. Stay tuned for the exciting final installment of the Bearing Wheel Stop Trilogy, which is, of course, on stops, critical for roller derby. And in the meantime, thanks for joining, and I'll see you again really soon.
The science of derby, the science of derby. Let's learn something new.